Hello and welcome to UX Leadership by Design. I'm Mark Baldino, your host. I'm also a co-founder of Fuzzy Math. Fuzzy Math is the user experience design consultancy that brings consumer-grade UX to business applications for B2B and enterprise tools. Today, I speak with Mauricio Steffen, who is a senior director of product management at Ericsson. Our conversation centers around a topic I'm passionate about: customer research. Mauricio has been in the customer research game for a long time across a diverse range of roles, from corrections officer to frontline customer support to product management. And he maps not only the process of gathering client feedback at scale, but what do you do with it? How can we remove our blinders during that process? How do we bring the rest of our team along for the ride? And in particular, we talk about that famous, potentially improperly attributed quote to Henry Ford: "If I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse." Hint, when you hear somebody say that, it's a cop-out. It takes real conviction to speak to your customers, to hear them, to empathize with them, and then to take their answers and get from want to true need, and then turn those needs into better product direction. So I think it's an interesting conversation, and it's with somebody who's really passionate about their customer's role in product management and product development. So please enjoy this episode, and thank you as always for listening. Mauricio, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. I know we talked last year and have been planning this for a while, so I'm really excited to get you onto the podcast and appreciate your time today. Would love for you to, introduce yourself and what you do, and maybe give the audience a little bit of information on your background.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm Mauricio Steffen. My current role is Senior Director of Product Management for Wireless WAN Edge at Ericsson in their Enterprise Wireless Solutions division. That was originally an acquisition for Ericsson, a company called Cradlepoint, based out of Boise, Idaho. That's how I came on to Ericsson, as I started with Cradlepoint. I actually started with Cradlepoint probably 13 years ago now, and I started in the support department. And at the time, we made consumer products that were sold in like Best Buys, Fry's. This was like, if you remember kind of cellular technology, this was like pre-MiFi days, right? So MiFi's, hotspots that you could get from your carrier weren't really a thing. You could get the USB sticks that you plugged into your laptop to get cellular internet. And the reason why I bring that up is because in the early days, we sold to consumers a little Wi-Fi hotspot that you plug that USB stick in to get internet. And then the company evolved into more enterprise products. If anybody's familiar with Cradlepoint or Ericsson Enterprise Wireless today, we evolved into those more kind of business grade products over time. And now we mostly just focus on business to business. And then pre-Ericsson, actually, this is really kind of my second career. So right out of high school, I went into corrections and law enforcement here in the state of Idaho, and I did that for about 11 years. And then the job's a difficult job, as you can imagine. And so then I went back to college and got a degree in network engineering, and that's how I kind of ended up at Cradlepoint and now Ericsson.
Wow. Okay, so corrections officer, or just in corrections in general?
Corrections officer. So I spent about 11 years. Started off as a corrections officer, worked my way up to the rank of sergeant, and that job just takes a toll on your mental health and your physical health, as you can imagine. Kind of decided to move on, and then this is kind of where my career took me.
Amazing. That is, honestly, I love hearing about people's career arcs and what they got to, how they got to where they are now. That's certainly an interesting one, and I'm sure a pretty big shift. But maybe, in the tech world, maybe a big shift, but in the grand scheme of things, a smaller shift. So you started in support, and now you find yourself in, as a director of product management. What was that sort of transition like?
Yeah. So, funny enough, you mentioned it's like a big shift and not a big shift. The funny thing is, corrections, support, even product management, like there's one key skill that kind of ties all those careers together, and it's talking to people. Right. It's talking to people, understanding, what they're looking for, getting to like kind of the root of what they're looking for, whether, in corrections, it's a little more intense, but in technology, it's the same kind of thing, right? In support, you're trying to get to the crux of the issue that the customer is experiencing. In product management, you're trying to get to what the actual problem that a customer needs to solve. And it just really all involves, listening skills, active listening skills, and communication skills. So as far as like going from support to product management, right? I like I mentioned, I went from corrections, got my degree in network engineering, and then was looking for a job. And Cradle Point. I had a friend who worked at Cradle Point. Was like, hey, this is a great small startup company. You should come, work for us. Kind of get your foot in the door while you're figuring out what else you wanted to do. Obviously, I got my degree in network engineering, had my Cisco CCNA, CCNP, CCNA security, yada, 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 and on and on and on. And so I expected to go work in an IT department in a Cisco shop or something along those lines. But I really started to enjoy support, right? Because it was something different every single day. It was a different challenge. Obviously, there's a lot of the same stuff, resetting passwords, that kind of stuff. But there was also a lot of different challenges that allowed me to exercise a whole lot of different networks that I wouldn't have the opportunity to do had I gone into the more traditional route working for an IT department. It would have been the same network infrastructure over and over again. And in the support department, I got to view all sorts of different network infrastructure. And then I kind of worked my way up over the years in support, from just being a support engineer to being a senior support engineer to running a support team to managing almost the entire support department. But one of the things that just kind of was of interest to me was how our products were developed, right? What were the decisions that went into how products were developed, and how I could better influence that, having kind of a unique perspective coming from support on what customers are looking for, what their needs are. And so at the time, there was a little bit of change going into the product management department. This was probably, I want to say 5-6 years ago. There's a little bit of change in leadership there. And so when the new leader came on, I had the opportunity to speak with him. A couple of people from the product management department kind of advocated on my behalf. And, he was willing to give me an opportunity to move into kind of a more junior product management role. And so, at that point, it was a little bit of a step back in my career because I was a manager in the support department, kind of managing almost the entire support team. But it was a unique opportunity that I wanted to take advantage of. So I moved over to product management and, took on a more junior role, worked under a couple of great product managers that kind of shaped how my product management philosophy, but allowed me to kind of move up and work on software and hardware, and commercial models, different types of things within our company. Until finally, I was asked to kind of start to lead a team, and that kind of evolved into the role that I'm in now.
Awesome. It's a great journey. And I think, as you've alluded to, has given you a pretty interesting perspective on maybe the role of product management or the philosophy of, and you don't have to go philosophical here, but I do like to sort of ask people, how do you define product management? What do you think's the role? Or maybe if you just want to start with like your personal take on this is what, how you feel about product management. It'd be helpful for maybe the audience to frame it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, you mentioned philosophical. There's a lot of philosophies out there, everything from you're the CEO of your product, and that one I don't necessarily ascribe to, because the CEO has actual authority where a product manager may not have any actual authority. And most of your ability to get things
Right.
done is through more soft skills, right? Through negotiation, through research and presenting your business case and making people buy into your business case and understand why the thing that you're doing is important. So I think one of the key things that I think is really undersold in product management is the education role in the rest of the business, right? Because as a product manager, you're expected to be the expert in your market, whatever that is, right? If in my case, it's wireless WAN technologies, it's cellular technologies, and your role is to educate engineering and other parts of the business as to why the things that we need to do are important, right? Whether it's important to be a market leader, whether it's important to show technological leadership, whether it's important because it's what your customers are asking you for. So, but your role is to really socialize all of those aspects and why we should do the thing that we should do. And then ultimately, how is that thing going to make money? Because regardless of the industry, all businesses are in business to make money. So, that has to be part of that evaluation. But I really think it is the role of the product manager to educate the rest of the business on why the things we do are important.
Interesting. And what's a tip or two to get people who either can't hear you, don't want to hear you, feel like there's a different perspective or priority? You've talked about these are human to human connections. This is about communication and, maybe gathering consensus. But what is a tip or two if you have some holdouts that you've learned along the way to get people on your side?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody's got an opinion. The great thing about that is ideas can come from anywhere. They can come from engineering, they can come from support, they can come from even places that you might not suspect in a business, right? If your business is not finance, like ours is technology, but even the finance people can have ideas about, the technology and stuff like that. So I think one of the big things is make sure that you are actively listening and people feel like you do hear what they're saying, because everybody won't always agree on the direction, everybody won't always agree on the prioritization. But one of the biggest things is having that discussion so that everybody feels heard and feels like their opinion or their information was synthesized as part of the decision. Because if you just blow people off, then that's when they're going to, quite frankly, make it their mission to make sure that what you want does not happen, right? And that's not the role. You don't want it to be adversarial. Everybody wants the same goal. Everybody wants the company, their team, everyone there to be successful. And so it shouldn't be an adversarial thing, but you want to make sure that everybody feels heard, because at the end of the day, even if their decision isn't the way that they go, if they feel heard and they feel like that their position was considered, then they'll understand and they can get behind the decision that was made.
Yeah. So a lot of the art of stakeholder management
Mhm.
is including them in on that process. And as you said, I think if people are heard and there's a space and they know that you're listening, even if it doesn't end up, heading down a path that they had strongly advocated for, there's going to be a little less resistance. You also mentioned a throughput of all of your roles is talking to people, but in particular talking to customers, and maybe who those customers has shifted over time. But how does talking to customers in your current role or previous roles, like how does that influence your thinking? How do you help it make a case? What do you do sometimes when um, the business and financial decisions are a little bit out of step with maybe what you're hearing from customers? But maybe you just break down like what is your customer outreach process and how do you incorporate it into the role of product management?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Is there's your customers are probably your most valuable resource of feedback, right? They're the ones that are using your product every single day, day in, day out. Well, hopefully day in, day out. Depending on the product, it may be more weekly or whatever it is, but they're the ones who really understand your product probably better than anybody else. So they will understand, where things are going well, where things are not going great. But depending on the size of your company, and the number of customers you have, if you're listening to every single customer, read every single comment, synthesize that as part of your direction. But as you grow, you have to figure out ways to do that at scale. Like it's not feasible to do that. And then also, while every customer is important, you want to be careful about, over rotating on maybe customers who don't use your product as much, or even over rotating on your largest customer that's providing the maybe a lion's share of revenue. Like those are extremes that you want to take into account what they're saying, but you want to synthesize it as well. And so you have to figure out a process to be able to collect that at scale and kind of synthesize that data at scale. Funny enough, I'm going to throw out a buzzword. I'm not a big fan of buzzwords, but I'll throw out the big one of the day, AI. In this case, AI could actually be a valuable tool, because one of the things that AI is great at is taking a lot of written information and summarizing it for you, finding patterns, finding similarities, that kind of thing. So getting a tool basically, and I want to caution people here. I had a great mentor that told me tools don't make process. So find your process first and then find a tool that fits into it. But among those tools, AI, especially LLMs today, are super useful when it comes to synthesizing you through all of that written data and pull out those kind of common themes, common comments through your customers. And then, an MPI process or some kind of survey scoring like that is also a valuable way of doing that, because not everybody might take the time to go provide feedback, but a lot of times people will fill out that quick MPI survey because it's usually 2 questions, right? It's give me a rating 1 through 10, tell me why you rated that. So, have a way of doing that. And then the other thing is, don't simply just rely on those kind of tools. Go out and talk to your customers. Form customer user groups. Form, if you are a B2B kind of company and you sell through like channel partners, value-added resellers or distributors or things like that, form a partner user group, because your partners, the people who are selling your product, are going to be a valuable source of information. And then listen to them. Right? Don't just have the user groups and have the meetings to go through the motions. Listen to what they say, synthesize what they say, ask questions, in those groups, because a lot of times the first comment you get is just that surface level comment. You want to go deeper to make sure that you get to the actual problem you're trying to solve. I can never remember who said this quote, but the quote sticks with me, right? Is like, and I think it's Henry Ford, or it may have been Steve Jobs or someone like that. But it's like, if you, and I'm summarizing here, it's like, if you always do what the customer wants, we'd have the fastest horses on the planet, right? No one would have ever imagined the automobile as they're riding around on horses. Take what your customers are saying and your partners are saying with a grain of salt. I know I'm really being contradictory here, but take what they say but get deeper, get into that next level, and take all those things. But sometimes you do have to make those decisions where you want to expand into a different market or expand into a different use cases, and your partners have a hard time understanding why you're doing that and why you're not doing something else where they think that your time might be more valuably spent. And you have to especially when it comes to, like I mentioned, partners, right? Especially when it comes to partners, like if you're selling channel partners, you have to bring them along on that journey. You have to help them understand why this is important, not only for your business, but for their business as well. And hopefully then you can get them to understand why, yeah, maybe they're not asking for this, but they understand why going this direction is important for your business to survive, as well as important for their business to help expand and thrive. So, and same thing with your customers. Your customers might not always understand why you do certain things as far as features, functionalities that you're releasing that you feel are strategic or you feel are needed to demonstrate technical leadership. You just got to be able to bring them on that journey and help them understand why those things are important. But then always, it's a balance. There's never enough resources. So make sure you are not just over rotating on those things that are strategic, but you are delivering things that your customers are asking for as well that are valuable to them.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned balance a number of times, and I think that's kind of key, because I actually heard that Henry Ford didn't say that, although I do believe Steve Jobs quoted it. But I often hear it as a justification for not doing any research and not talking to customers, and basically saying, we understand what our clients need, or we think this is revolutionary. We couldn't possibly ask people how they would use something or what they want, because they tell us what they want. They're just going to want a faster horse. And like, it's almost this weird reflexive response. I had this clip sent to me by a number of clients. If any of you are happy to listen to it right now, you know who you are, showing me Steve Jobs talking about the Henry Ford quote. But if they don't think Steve Jobs didn't do market research, they're totally fooling themselves. If they don't think Apple started with prototypes and got feedback on that and iteratively improved their products over time, and that's how they did innovation, that they're wrong. And so I think people sometimes use it as a shield to not expose their ideas to customers. And I mean, I know it sounds like maybe to you and your experience, or I don't necessarily know enough about Ericsson, like to say, of course you want to talk to your customers, but there are thousands and thousands of organizations out there that refuse to listen to their customers at any level and don't engage them. And to loop it back to your point about how do you engage stakeholders is by bringing them along for the process. That's how you should engage your clients, is bring them along for the process. Yes, sometimes you're going to have to turn to them and say, we're not doing feature A or feature B because we don't see enough market demand, or we can't do this for like a roadmap item. And obviously with a customer, you might not get that. Maybe with a channel partner, you might not get that specific with a customer. The idea is that you have to bringing people along for the ride and involving them in the process and hearing them, listening, empathizing with them, and then demonstrating over time that, yes, we did hear you, and this is how it impacted our product roadmap. Like that's really, really powerful. And I think too many people are afraid to ask those questions because they don't want to hear the answers, or afraid to ask their customers because they think they're going to steer them wrong or steer them in the wrong direction. So I never want to take it for granted that organizations that develop a product that human beings use, I never want to take for granted that those folks are actually spending a lot of time on customer development and working with customers and setting up panels and doing outreach and listening to them, as it sounds like at Ericsson at kind of all levels or at all periods in the life cycle.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I think that people do hesitate to talk to their customers because they don't want to hear their customers or their partners tell them that they were wrong. Like this feature was wrong, this direction was wrong, it was bad. Because I'll even use myself as an example. A lot of time, effort went into a lot of the features in the products that I developed, and if people don't like them or don't want to use them, that's a little personally devastating to me. So I mean, I understand the inclination of not wanting to hear that feedback. But what's funny is, like, you're right, that quote people used to shield as to, oh, that's why I don't, they won't know what they want. But that's people who don't understand, like, you have to go to that next level. Yeah, they'll tell you, I want a faster horse, but is it really that I want a faster horse, or that you just want to get from point A to point B faster and you don't care how that happens? And so I think it's maybe is a little bit about ignoring that surface level ask and trying to get to that next level. Like, what is the actual problem that you want to solve with this product, so that I can understand? Because maybe with our collective wisdom, we could think of a better way to do it, as opposed to just making a faster horse, right? Getting from point A to point B. Because now we have horses, we have planes and trains and automobiles, all for the point to get you from faster point A to point B. And back when it was just horses, no one would have ever imagined any of those, but they all wanted to get faster from point A to point B. And so, yeah, so I think it's very important like you mentioned, in all areas of the life cycle, everything from when it's an idea to even right before it's about to go out the door and beyond, to continue to engage your customers and get that feedback. The other, like, really key piece, especially for me, is to really just, you can never have enough people. Actually, let me rephrase that a little bit. When you have a group of people together, it starts, you start to, good, bad, or indifferent, you start to get that kind of hive think, right? People start to think the same way. They start to think about solving the problems the same way. New people come in and they provide you a fresh perspective, but depending on your organization, if you have a good organization, that might not happen very often. People want to stay. Like at Ericsson, the greater Ericsson, not just in my division, sometimes there's not a lot of turnover. And so you get that kind of hive think, where if you engage your customers and you engage your partners, it's really a free way to get new ideas, right? They start to either validate the way you're thinking, or they challenge the way you're thinking, so that you start to think outside of what you and everyone around you is normally thinking about how to solve a problem.
That's great. I mean, I think that that's like an acute problem that many organizations have, hive mind, or just like they're blinded by their own assumptions, and everyone's really, really close to the problem and we can't step back from it. And you definitely have to have the right processes in place and the right folks on your team to go out and do it. But actually going out and getting a fresh set of eyes from your customers or channel partners, folks that are stakeholders, and then being willing to hear it, right, and do something about it, because that's change is the hard part. Executing, going out and talking to people, I mean, at scale, really, really hard, but it's like synthesizing hard. But then actually, like, if you're you're in your role, the product manager, talking to customers, partners, bringing it back, synthesizing it, trying to do next level, and then come back to the team and say we should change course here, or we should shift the roadmap. Like that last part is really, really hard, which is actually getting people or seeing it ourselves that I am too close to this and I do need to change. Because as you said, people listen. The last episode that was released, we talked about this, which is like humans are not great at admitting that they're wrong, and so we put a lot of time and energy into our work lives. We're going down a path, and to get confronted with something that contradicts with some of our assumptions or how we've been pushing forward is it's really hard, I think. And that's like a natural inclination. So you have to build that muscle memory of going back out, asking tough questions, and then taking an honest look at it and saying, were our assumptions wrong? Do we need to shift where we're going?
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a lot of, I think, uh, um, self knowledge. It takes a lot of self reflection to be able to, like, unfortunately, it happens sometimes. It's happened to us a couple of times where we've gotten into product development and we're about halfway through a piece of hardware or a major piece of software, and feedback starts coming in, both from customers, from the market in general, that maybe this is not the right thing. And there's not just your own personal time and effort, but there's real money resources tied to having gone down there. And so it's hard to say, hey, we need to stop, and either this project is just going to stop here because we don't think it's going to be successful anymore, and we're going to save the rest of these resources, knowing that you have just kind of wasted time and effort here. And it's also the people who invested their time and effort here. It's hard to tell them, hey, all that stuff that you started working on, we don't know if it's going to be successful, so we're just going to have to put a pause on that and go do something else. And so it's really hard for people to really take that. And then also, from a professional standpoint, people worry about how that's going to make them look, right? I convinced everybody that we should go down this path. We started down the path, and now I'm the one saying, oh, we should stop. And so it's definitely, people kind of feel like, one, it's personally damaging to them and their self-worth, but then they also feel like that might be damaging to their career. But I would my feedback to people on that is, like, the thing that's going to be most damaging to your career is if you waste all the resources, finish that product, and it's a failure, and that you could have saved those resources and spent them on something else. Because I also had another mentor, one of my favorite sayings of his is, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So there's always opportunity cost in the decision of the thing that you decide to do and the thing that you don't decide to do. And so you don't want to finish something that is not going to be successful in lieu of something that you could have started that might be more successful.
Yeah, no, 100%. And as you said, continuing to march down that same path, it might be shorter, but in the end, it could be more detrimental to, I mean, I don't want to say someone's career, but a group or an organization or even a company overall. And it takes a lot of strength and conviction to sort of stand up and raise a flag and say, I think we ought to reconsider this, because there is a lot of risk, right? There's maybe lost money moving backwards, and then it's gonna take resources to sort of shift that direction. I did want to go back to one thing because I want to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly and how I heard it, which was this sort of balance between what a customer says they want and maybe what they need. I think your advice is to do deeper, like pain point and goal analysis, but also kind of root cause analysis, which is like, yes, they've stated this is what they want, but it's really going back down to the problem and then kind of continuing to do that root cause analysis till you get into sort of the heart of the issue. Am I overstating that too much?
No, I think you're stating it exactly right. Is like, let's just say you have 100 customers and 20 of them are asking for something that you feel is similar, but they've all phrased it a different way. Like, I want, this button that does this over here. I want to be able to do this workflow similar or simply or simplified. Sorry, can't English today. I want this workflow simplified, something along those lines. But after you really dig into all 20 of those requests, it turns out they all want the same thing. They all have the same problem that they're thinking about solving in 20 different ways. It's a little difficult, and it is time, an investment in time. I don't want to say time consuming, but it's an investment in time that will return dividends, because instead of figuring out which one of those 20 ways that or one of those 20 things that you're going to do that's going to satisfy that one customer out of 20, if you dug deeper, you could actually find that all 20 customers have the same problem, and you could solve it for all 20 customers in one shot. So it is about not just looking at that surface level of, I want X. It's, why do you want X? And repeating that with the next customers, like, hey, I understand that you're asking for Y, but it sounds like you have this problem. What if we solved it in that way? And you might find that you're able to satisfy more customer or partner requests that way, because you really understand the problem that they're getting to. So, I think the things that I would say that do that is one, again, the buzzword of the day, AI. Find a way to synthesize a lot of written data quickly so that you can get to what those common things are. And then you have a group of customers that you can talk about those common themes are. Once you have that, spend time talking to those customers. Also, I would also recommend a way of, walking in their shoes, shoulder surfing, right? If you have like a cloud software, there are definitely tools out there that will allow you to see customers interact with your solution. If you have that 20 customers, you can look at what they're doing and you can see commonalities in, maybe they're having a challenge with a workflow or a challenge with a part of your software. So there's a lot of ways to do that, to start to gather data so that you can make those conversations, which are probably going to take the most amount of time, really meaningful. Because, if you have hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of customers, there's no way you're ever going to get to talk to all of them. And so you want it, when the ones that you do get to talk to, and not all of them are going to want to talk to you. So the ones that you do talk to, you want to make sure that that time is well spent for both you and them, getting to the crux of what they need, and then show movement or show value in that conversation. I think going all the way back to even those that are just submitting written requests or submitting net promoter score surveys or any kind of surveys, show show your customers that you value the gift that they just gave you, because feedback is a gift. Because like you said, like, we could do this in a vacuum and your business would likely fail. Maybe you get lucky and maybe you strike a chord with somebody, but if you're not listening to your customers, chances are you're going to fail. And so treat that feedback as a gift and make sure that the customers understand that you feel that as a gift. Otherwise, they're just going to stop talking to you.
Right on. I love it. Thank you for summarizing those sort of several points you've made throughout. And I'm glad you brought up the concept of a gift, because it's their time and energy. They don't need to provide it. And when they do, and you utilize it correctly, you're giving them a little bit of a gift back. I'm sort of sifting through those gifts and figuring out which ones make the most sense. And I'm not like, I think advocating for AI, both in taking large sums of data and summarizing, but also helping it do root cause analysis. Like, sometimes that can be hard, and asking it to like help you dig deeper and give you potential root causes will, it can do that faster, and maybe not all of them are right. And that's where humans come in to sort of sift through that information. So I think it's great advice in how to do it at scale, how to synthesize it, and then how to help it formulate or shift sort of product direction. I'm going to wrap with one question, just because I thought of it at the start. And while you had a very succinct summary, hopefully I'm not going to ruin it by asking one more question, which is like, you've dealt with a lot of different types of stakeholders in your career, in corrections, in support. You're dealing with people who are like frustrated this thing's not working, and maybe a hardware issue or a software issue. Now you're working with a kind of a large array, which includes customers and stakeholders. Like, what's the most challenging dynamic to work in? I'm not asking you to throw your current team under the bus, but it's such a diverse set of folks that you've listened to throughout your career, and you've tried to advocate for them, listen to them, and make changes. Like, which of those is more challenging out of any of them?
I'm going to use a little bit of a cop-out answer. Obviously corrections is its own beast, right? You have people who are probably at the lowest points of their life, and they're incarcerated. They're away from their families. They're away from everything that they know. Every aspect of their life is being controlled. You know, everything from what they're allowed to have to when they're allowed to eat to when they're allowed to sleep, and so obviously that brings on its own challenges, and you know, regardless of whether it's them or a customer with a technical issue, or you know, just in product management, you know, trying to align stakeholders, empathy is the key, right? People are people, and you just have to empathize with what they need or what their situation is. The reason why I use empathy is you have to try and understand. That doesn't mean you have to agree. It doesn't mean you have to bend to their will. It doesn't mean any of those things. But you have to understand their point of view in order to be able to communicate effectively with them and hopefully come to some kind of consensus, you know, and corrections, whether it's getting them to do what they need to do or what they're told to do. And support, it's, you know, whether it's getting them to just try that one thing where they're convinced that one thing isn't going to work, but please just do it anyway. So not because I have a script, but because I think it will work. Or, you know, in business, it's like, you know, understanding that, hey, I think that this is the key, you know, this is the thing we need to do. This is the direction we need to go, and trying to get everybody on board.
That's great. Well, I think it's very clear that you empathize with your customers, with constituents, with stakeholders, with the folks you've worked with throughout your career, and you're passionate about the work you do. Thank you for your time and energy, for joining me on the podcast, for sharing your background and journey. And really, I think are some very concrete ways that folks in product management, but also design and engineering and business can better empathize with people, ensure they incorporate customer feedback, user feedback, client feedback into their processes and help them sort of drive change within the organization. So, Mauricio, thank you very much for your time today.
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me. I really appreciate having me on.
All right, you bet. Thanks.